Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Melanie Zanona in Washington, where the president is lashing out at the Supreme Court, threatening to use his power to destroy economic rivals and vowing a global tariff in response to the Supreme Court today dealing a serious blow to his signature economic policy, striking down most of the tariffs that his administration has imposed. The ruling raising many questions about what comes next for the White House's economic agenda, and also what happens to the billions of dollars it has already collected from those tariffs, which are now determined to be unconstitutional. Two of the president's Supreme Court picks, as well as Chief Justice John Roberts, joined the court's liberal justices in the historic 6-3 decision, ruling that the president exceeded his authority in using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose those sweeping tariffs on numerous countries. Chief Justice Roberts writing, quote, "The framers gave Congress alone the power to impose tariffs during peacetime. The president must point to clear congressional authorization to justify his extraordinary assertion of that power. He cannot." President Trump calling the decision a disgrace while accusing the justices of caving to foreign pressure in issuing this decision.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. It's my opinion that the court has been swayed by foreign interests and a political movement that is far smaller than people would ever think.
The president also vowing to invoke other presidential authorities to impose tariffs and other penalties on trading partners, and then announcing a 10% tariff worldwide.
But other alternatives will now be used to replace the ones that the court incorrectly rejected. We have alternatives. Today, I will sign an order to impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122, over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. And we're also initiating several Section 301 and other investigations to protect our country from unfair trading practices of other countries and companies. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
All things considered, it was a fairly calm day on Wall Street, with stocks closing slightly higher on the day. The ruling puts more than just the White House economic agenda in limbo, as Justice Brett Kavanaugh notes in his dissenting opinion. The court says nothing today about whether, and if so, how, the government should go about returning the billions of dollars that is already collected from these tariffs. President Trump telling reporters today that he believes that this particular issue will be tied up in court for years to come.
They take months and months to write an opinion, and they don't even discuss that point. We've taken in hundreds of billions of dollars, not millions, hundreds of billions of dollars. And so I said, well, what happens to all the money that we took in? It wasn't discussed. Wouldn't you think they would have put one sentence in there saying that keep the money or don't keep the money, right? I guess it has to get litigated for the next 2 years.
Are you saying that you don't plan to honor refunds for companies that file for them?
I just told you the answer, right? I told you the answer. It's not discussed. We'll end up being in court for the next 5 years.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins me now, along with NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans, NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin. An absolutely stacked lineup of reporters. Thank you all so much for joining us. Monica, I want to start with you at the White House because these tariffs had been really the centerpiece of Trump's economic agenda. So how big of a defeat does the administration see today's decision as being?
It is hard to overstate, Mel, just how significant this is for the president's agenda and really what a rebuke this is to something that he has considered a total cornerstone of this second term. This is something he talks about at every event, at every campaign rally. This is something he continually points to in terms of saying that he believes the economy is as strong as he thinks it is. So this is a White House that is absolutely on the back foot right now. And the president himself was absolutely fuming and very frustrated. The way that he learned about this in real time, ironically, he found out way later than the world did because he was in an event with these bipartisan group of governors this morning when an aide passed him a note informing him of the ruling, which he then called a disgrace. He essentially said he did have a backup plan, which I know we're going to talk about more later. But then he said that he had to leave this event early to try to figure out then how the White House was going to respond to it. And I have to tell you, Mel, this is a White House that has known this possibility could be coming for months, but it still took them a couple of hours to figure out exactly how they wanted to respond today. And they have provided little specifics on exactly now how they're going to position and message this. And remember, it's the president who has said recently that he feels they have a PR problem when it comes to the economy, one that just got way more complicated with this decision.
Yeah, somewhat surprising that they were so slow to respond to this. You mentioned the backup plan. So President Trump says he will impose a 10% global tariff. What provision or law is the White House using to justify this? And do we know when these tariffs will take effect?
So we know that the president is essentially now trying to make this argument under a larger national security umbrella. And when we talk about that 10% tariff, if you look at some of the other countries and remember back to so-called Liberation Day last April, there were way higher tariffs placed on some of these countries. So the fact that now you're going to have this baseline of 10% is, again, way lower, a huge difference in what initially they wanted to do. But this is an argument that the president is making and that his Treasury Secretary is saying they're going to be able to do under these provisions because, again, they can make this justification. There could still be, though, more court rulings. There could still be more challenges to this. This isn't the end of it. It's just something where the president is trying to make an argument. The administration is saying they still believe they can have a pretty high tariff revenue stream even in 2026, despite this major setback.
I know the markets definitely welcome today's decision. Is there any chance that the White House tries to spin this as a victory?
Well, I think that certainly you could see the president somehow doing that. He does like to sort of, when he's embattled in these moments, find a way to say, well, this is why it's even better. This could potentially now be a way for me to try this different approach that then, in his view or in his way that he will try to spin it, he'll argue was even better. Or if there are other positive economic indicators that come out that are separate from these tariffs in the coming weeks and months, I think you can expect the president to celebrate that. But remember, he's the one who's saying you're going to feel more benefits of my programs down the line later this year. He's trying to tell people to be patient.
We shall see. Monica Alba, thank you. Christine, I want to bring you into this conversation. What would a 10% global tariff really mean for American consumers?
I mean, it would be a relief, quite frankly, from the tariff rates that you're seeing right now. And it's way better than what we had seen way back in April on that Liberation Day when the president threatened huge tariffs, varying tariffs on countries around the world. I mean, so I think it's being taken as a positive for the cost of living story and the affordability story for American consumers. You know, the White House has said for so long, Mel, that these tariffs they're not a price problem. They don't cause inflation. They're not passed along to American consumers. The White House has said they're paid for by foreign governments, which is not true. They're paid for, of course, by the importers, the American companies that are importing these goods. So a 10% rate is definitely an improvement. But there are other tariffs that are still in place, and the president is actually threatening more tariffs using different authorities in the months ahead. So I think what you'll see in the near term, you're going to see importers rushing to get stuff in at a low tariff rate right now to stockpile for the rest of the year.
You said some tariffs are still in place. Can you tell me what tariffs are indeed still in place?
Well, for steel and aluminum, there are tariffs for the auto industry. There are some tariffs on pharmaceuticals. There are tariffs also on semiconductors. There are tariffs, though, there's blanket tariffs on China and Canada and Mexico. Those come off, and that's pretty important here because those are some of the most significant tariffs on America's biggest trading partners. So that will be a very near-term favorable thing for the cost of living story. And a reminder, you know, the White House has said that these tariffs don't add to costs for people, but the White House has also been lowering and removing tariffs, as you know, on some food goods from some countries. I think a tacit acknowledgement that when you put taxes on something that's imported that we don't necessarily make here, well, the prices rise for that.
That's such an important point. We did not see drastic inflation results resulting from Trump's tariffs. With no tariffs in place, will we see any price change?
I mean, the hope is that maybe, I mean, assuming that you don't have big onerous new tariffs that come on here very quickly. I mean, the Federal Reserve and others have been watching how tariffs have been passed through, and they think that there's a very short-term kind of one-time effect on prices, and that will start to get better over time. That was, of course, before this ruling which essentially said the president of the United States illegally collected $133 billion worth of tariffs from American companies. Now, I've been talking to those American companies today, and boy, they'd really like to see a quick and an easy refund, which can be done. These are all electronic payments. But as you played here, it sounds like the president wants to fight, and he's gonna, I guess, make these small businesses, medium-sized businesses, these importers, go to court to try to get their money back.
No doubt. Christine, thank you so much. Gary, I want to turn to you to dig into this decision. You're our court expert here. The justices appeared skeptical of the Trump administration's argument. Were there any surprises that stood out to you today in the decision?
So this is the way court watchers generally thought this was going to go, because the text of IEPA, the statute we're talking about here, is really clear. It says the president has the power in an emergency to regulate, to prescribe, to investigate, to prohibit. Nowhere does it say the president has the power to tax. Nowhere does it say the president has the power to tariff. And that is what Chief Justice John Roberts really focused in on. He didn't even get into the issue of whether or not that we're actually in an emergency right now. That he didn't need to, because it doesn't say tariff and it doesn't say tax.
Yeah, so in your view, was this more about tariffs, or was this ruling more about presidential authority?
So this is about presidential authority, but it's also about congressional power, right? This is putting the power that something Congress made back into the hands of Congress. And that is what certainly, when they were writing this bill years and years ago, that is certainly what they intended. And this is what Chief Justice John Roberts is putting forward here today.
You know, over the past few years, the court has really granted a lot of power to the executive branch, rescinded authority away from Congress. Do you see that sort of reversing with this ruling?
I mean, think about what we've already done and seen over the past year and a half, right? We've seen the federal workers being fired, and you've seen the Supreme Court being okay with that. You've seen a number of immigration moves, the Supreme Court being okay with that. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do this here. That is a very significant step, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a changing of the way they're looking at things, because the president never had this authority in the first place. That's what IEPA says.
One thing that stood out to me in the briefing today is that Trump said he might fight in court any effort to provide refunds for these tariffs. What might that litigation look like?
Well, he doesn't have to fight in court, right? This is not a required thing that the Trump administration has to go to court for. There are ways, it's a real complicated process, but there are ways for tariff receipts to be sent to the federal government and for them to just pay back what is owed. It is hundreds of billions of dollars. There are hundreds and thousands of companies that now deserve this money back. This does not have to go to court, but it likely will, because the Trump administration has done that hundreds of times over the past year and a half.
Something else Trump said in the briefing today was that this decision provided him with, quote, very powerful alternatives to impose tariffs. Is he right?
So, sort of. The court did not say, oh, here's a bunch of alternatives. That's certainly not what Chief Justice John Roberts laid out. In his dissent, what Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh said was there are 5 or 6, and here's a list of them, 5 or 6 different ways that the president can legally impose tariffs. Some of them have to go through the United States Trade Representative, who was up there right behind the president at the briefing room today. Certainly he'll be supportive of anything the president tries to do.
Oh, I'm sure. Julie, Democrats are calling today's ruling a victory for Democrats. But what are Republicans saying on Capitol Hill?
Republicans are, for the most part, kind of lukewarm about this ruling. Can't think of a Republican besides maybe Bernie Moreno, who we'll talk about in a second, of Ohio, who's really going to bat like the president is, with that fire, with the anger at this ruling. Most of them are saying, you know what, we'll take a look at this decision. Congress and the White House will talk. That's what Speaker Johnson is saying, Leader Thune as well. But there are some Republicans who are applauding this ruling, including the 4 who voted in October. I'm talking about Senator Mitch McConnell, for example, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, who voted to rebuke some of the president's tariffs back in October. Leader McConnell, for example, saying that this ruling is essentially reaffirming that Trump circumventing congressional authority is illegal.
I mean, to that point, this is such a victory for members of Congress who have seen their power eroded over the years, in some ways because they gave that power to the Trump administration. But how are lawmakers viewing that in this context?
Well, here's the thing. You heard the president say it today. We don't need Congress. We don't need any of them to try and affirm these tariffs that they want to impose, and they have been imposing. But they kind of do need Congress, right? That's what the Supreme Court reaffirmed today. That's what Gary was just talking about. And the thing is, though, the president knows he doesn't currently have the votes to reaffirm his powers. So he's essentially employing or deploying this strategy of continuing to push Congress to the side to say they already did all they needed him to do on the one big beautiful bill, for example. Everything else on the tariff policy, he's got it. He'll let them fight in the courts. He's certainly not going to get the Republican votes to keep imposing those tariffs.
I mean, speaking of not having the votes, what about this idea that you mentioned Bernie Moreno is pushing, which is doing another reconciliation package to try to impose tariffs? Is there any shot of that passing on Capitol Hill?
The short answer, no. And I can think of a million issues. We were talking about this, health care for one, other issues that Republicans don't see the votes for in a bipartisan way. They're saying, you know what, let's do it through reconciliation, because it did work for them in the summer. There were even skeptics that that would happen and that would come across the finish line. A lot of Republicans want the president to be talking about the victories they saw from that, the tax cuts that they were able to extend over the summer. They don't want to be talking about a protruded battle that Democrats, quite frankly, would be willing to have a messaging war months ahead of the midterm elections on essentially trying to codify the president's power to raise taxes. That's not something Republicans want to talk about, but Bernie Moreno is, so we have one.
And notably, Trump himself said he doesn't see the need for another reconciliation bill. So a divide there, as usual. Gary and Julie, thank you both so much for joining us. While slamming the Supreme Court's decision, President Trump also said this ruling has now given him more power. Take a listen.
But now the court has given me the unquestioned right to ban all sorts of things from coming into our country, to destroy foreign countries. But a much more powerful right than many people ever thought we even had, but not the right to charge a fee. How crazy is that? Our country is the hottest country anywhere in the world right now. And it was a dead country 1.5 years ago under an incompetent president. But now I'm going to go in a different direction, probably the direction that I should have gone the first time, but I read the language. I'm very good at reading language, and it read our way 100%, but now I'll go the way I could have gone originally, which is even stronger than our original choice.
Joining me now is Tim Brightbill, an attorney specializing in international trade law and policy. Grateful for your expertise. I'm sure you read language very well, as Trump also said. I want to start by asking you about this 10% global tariff, as well as the other tariffs that are under the sections of law. First of all, does he actually have the authority to do that, in your view, especially based on this ruling? And could these new tariffs also be challenged in court?
So the president does have authority under Section 122 to impose these tariffs. It's never been used before in the 50 years that it's been on the books. So it is unprecedented, but the authority is there. Now, and that allows up to 15% tariffs. The president announced 10% today, and that can stay in place for up to 150 days. After that point, Congress would have to reauthorize those tariffs going forward.
So he says these new tariffs are the stronger choice and seem to suggest he'd have broader authority. Is that right?
I'm not sure it's broader authority. I think it's narrow to fill a balance of payments issue for a temporary period of time. But it might give the administration some time to use some of the other tools in the toolbox. You heard the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer refer to other tools, Section 301 of the trade laws, the national security laws under Section 232. So this temporary tariff could allow those other tools to come into play soon after.
I want to talk about the impacts here, because that is so important. Talk to me about what you think these new tariffs could have an impact in terms of the global economy as well as the American consumer.
Well, I think it's early to say what the impact will be. We already have hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs in place. There are agreements with our major trading partners. I don't expect that those agreements will be thrown out immediately. I think they will remain in place. Most countries would probably choose to have the certainty of an agreement that they've negotiated over the chaos of what we've seen over the last year. So I think we'll have to see how this plays out with our trading partners. Now, for businesses and companies and industries, they want certainty, right? They want to know what's coming so that they can plan accordingly. So they're looking to get their refunds if possible, and they're looking to know what the future will hold so that they can conduct business going forward.
What about the impact in terms of revenue? Because the president says he will now be taking in even more revenue than before. Do you buy that?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, there has been a huge amount, unprecedented amount of tariffs collected, but I don't think the new authorities necessarily will lead to even greater collections. And of course, there are possible court challenges to these new tariffs that might be introduced as well.
The other question I had, and he flicked at this in the briefing, is that some of these trade deals will remain in place. Some of them will be renegotiated. I mean, what is your view when it comes to having to renegotiate some of these trade agreements?
So my personal view is that most countries will choose to keep in place anything that they've already negotiated. They'd rather have the certainty. They'd rather know, even if they're going to have to pay tariffs, what that tariff level will be. But we haven't concluded those agreements with many of our major trading partners, the European Union, for example. So that does cause a bit of chaos. We'll have to see how that plays out as far as will there be negotiations, and has the president lost some leverage in those discussions with the EU and many of our other major trading partners.
I think the other question on a lot of people's minds, certainly on my mind, is how these refunds are going to work. $266 billion in total tariff revenue has already been collected, and of that, $133 billion was collected under the IEEPA. So American consumers were the ones who paid most of these tariffs. Trump seemed to suggest that he would not be paying them out. I mean, how do you see that refund process potentially playing out?
I think it'll move fairly quickly. This will go back to the Court of International Trade in New York, which first ruled that the IEEPA tariffs were illegal. There hopefully will be some sort of administrative process set up. Importantly, the Justice Department, President Trump's Justice Department, has already said that there will be refunds of these tariffs. So if the president were to try to change course, the courts are going to hold the Justice Department to what it's already said. So we're looking to see if there will be an orderly process for getting refunds back to consumers and businesses. Now, of course, consumers didn't pay the tariff, and they won't directly get refunds. It will go back to the importer of record who paid the tariffs originally.
So don't expect a check in your pocket.
Not anytime soon. That's right. Unfortunately, yes.
Tim, thank you so much for your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And now I want to turn to Republican Congressman Kevin Kiley of California. He recently voted to oppose President Trump's tariffs on Canada, and he's also a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start with this huge announcement, of course, of this 10% global tariff. Here's what the president said when my colleague Ryan Nobles asked if he'd need congressional approval. Take a listen.
Why wouldn't you just work with Congress to come up with a plan?
I don't have to
push tariffs.
I have
through.
the right to do tariffs, and I've always had the right to do tariffs, and it's all been approved by Congress, so there's no reason to do it. All we're doing is we're going through a little bit more complicated process, not complicated very much, but a little more complicated than what we had.
Congressman, what's your response to that?
Well, there is some truth to that in the sense that there are various statutes that impose some limited authority to do tariffs in certain circumstances, like if you have a Section 302 investigation, something like that. Today's decision, by the Supreme Court affects one particular tool that the president has used. So it may well be true, and of course these things might have to be tested in court as well, that there might be more limited authority to impose tariffs in some circumstances. But going forward, I do think it is important that Congress is involved in trade policy. I think that's the way that, our system was designed.
I want to ask about your vote. Were you voting on the substance of the tariffs when you voted to overturn them, or were you voting against how they were implemented by the president?
Well, it was actually two separate votes. So on the first one, it was a vote to just allow Congress to weigh in on these things. Actually, the specific statute was the National Emergencies Act, which says that when the president declares an emergency, then Congress has to vote every 6 months on whether the emergency still exists. The Speaker had used sort of an accounting trick to make it so Congress didn't actually do that for the emergencies the president has declared with respect to tariffs. And so I voted that way because that's the way the statute was designed, and I don't believe that it's a good thing to have endless emergencies without Congress ever even weighing in. And then the second vote was specifically with respect to the state of emergency the president has declared with respect to Canada, which he's then used as the basis for these tariffs. And on that vote, I looked at the facts. He had said that we had an emergency dealing with fentanyl coming over the northern border, and Canada has actually cracked down on fentanyl. There's been, by some estimates, a 97% reduction. So that, said to me that, well, the basis for that emergency is no longer there. And then it is finally true that the tariffs coming from Canada are sort of unique in the sense that this is our neighbor. We have a free trade agreement that was fairly recently signed with Canada, and there have been particular impacts when it comes to construction, agriculture, energy, and other areas.
So if the president came to you and your fellow Republicans and asked you guys to authorize any of these other tariffs, would you back that?
I'd look at it case by case. I think that, the facts are very different with different countries and different industries. So, for example, I think it is true that there have been unfair trade practices or ways in which American companies have been targeted by certain laws in Europe. I was actually in Europe a few months ago looking at this very question, how we have many American companies have been subjected to these massive fines without very good reason. And so, if that can be part of a negotiation negotiation to make sure that our companies are treated fairly, then that I might look at that differently than with respect to some other countries or some other industries. But I think the important thing is that, as was explained very well in Justice Gorsuch's opinion, his concurrence, when Congress is involved, then all of us can bring our own experiences to bear and knowledge and assessment of what is best for the country through the legislative process as our founders designed. I think I think that'll be the best thing for the country if we're able to have Congress involved in each individual case.
President Trump did call you and some of your fellow Republicans who voted against those tariffs, quote, not good Republicans. He also threatened to primary you. Meanwhile, he also bashed some of the Supreme Court justices who ruled against his tariffs, calling them lapdogs and rhinos and radical left Democrats. How do you respond to that, especially as you try to say that Congress needs to assert more of a role? I mean, is there room to criticize Trump in today's Republican Party?
Well, look, I mean, I try not to let criticism of any particular vote dictate my behavior. You're always going to make people unhappy with any vote, whichever way you go. You might have people who disagree with you. It might be your particular elements of your constituency who agree, some who disagree. So it's hard to make everyone happy. And in some cases, you might not make the leadership of your own party or even the president happy. But at the end of the day, I just try to do what I think is going to be best for my district, for my state, and for the country. And I think that, my constituents will judge my record in its entirety.
I do want to talk about the midterms because the president said yesterday in Georgia that he, quote, won and solved the affordability issue. Is that your view?
Well, I do think that you've seen progress in some important areas, like energy is one, right? Like across the country, we have had a big reduction in gas prices. But it absolutely is true that it's way too hard to get by in way too many parts of this country right now. And I'm coming from California. It's my state. It's actually the most unaffordable state in the country, where we have the highest gas prices, the highest electricity rates, among the highest water bills and housing costs and taxes. And so I think that issue is front and center, is perhaps the most salient issue for the folks I represent. And I do think it needs to be a big, big focus of what we do in Congress for the remainder of this year.
Do you think, especially Republicans in the House, are doing enough to address affordability? I know you've complained about during the historic shutdown, you guys were away from the House for so long. Do you think you guys are doing enough? And if not, could it cost Republicans the midterms?
I think we need to do more. And I do think that, of course, come election time, people are going to be judged according to their record. And I think that, the material conditions that people are experiencing in their day-to-day lives when it comes to the economic well-being and their ability to, provide for their family, that's going to be front and center. And so I think that, we have passed some really important measures when it comes to energy production. We've passed an important housing bill this last week. But, there's certainly plenty more to do. And you're right, having Congress gone for whatever it was, 2 months for no reason at all, and then also failing to address this issue with the increase in health care premiums with the expiration of these subsidies. I think that both of those things were very unfortunate. But we've got, plenty of time left in this year, and so we're back in session on Monday, and I think we really need to hit the ground running to address those concerns.
Congressman, I know you've not said exactly which district you plan to run in. Again, your district was impacted heavily by redistricting. But now that the dust has sort of started to settle and we're seeing that it might be a wash in terms of Republican and Democratic gains in redistricting, do you think it's going to backfire ultimately in the end for Republicans?
I think it's been a total disaster, this redistricting war. You're right. It looks like it's going to be about a wash. It never made any sense. I was against it in Texas. I was against it in California, in my state. Many of us across the country have now had our districts chopped into many different pieces. It's created enormous instability. It's fostered an enormous amount of distrust. And to what end? For something that's not even going to necessarily result in an advantage for one side or the other. So I think that we need to end gerrymandering in this country. We certainly shouldn't be doing it in the middle of the decade. So I'm working on legislation to actually do both of those things, to stop mid-decade redistricting and to establish some sort of independent system for every state so that we can have fair representation going forward.
Real quick, do you think House Republicans will keep the majority?
It's very hard to say this far out. I think that, we're 9 months or something from the midterms. And so a lot can happen then. But I think that it's incumbent on each of us to really do what we can to fight for affordability and for for certainly border security and all the things that that matter to the American people, and then we'll be judged accordingly. And I think that all of us have to run on our own record. It's not necessarily just one party versus the other. I think it's up to each of us to show that we're serving our constituents and serving the country.
Congressman, thank you.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Up next, after warning of, quote, bad things if Tehran doesn't make a deal on its nuclear program, President Trump today telling NBC News that he is considering a limited military strike on Iran. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. President Trump continues to drop clues about what potential U.S. military action on Iran could look like if the two sides don't reach an agreement on a nuclear deal. This morning, NBC's Monica Alba asked the president about the possibility of military action, while reporters were being escorted out of the president's event with U.S. governors. Take a listen.
President, are you considering a limited military strike to pressure Iran into a deal?
Thank you, press. Keep moving. Thank you.
Are you considering a limited strike, sir?
Thank you.
I can say I am considering it.
It, of course, comes amid the rapid U.S. military buildup in the Middle East. And after President Trump suggested yesterday that the timeline for action against Iran could be in the next 10 to 15 days. Joining me now on set is NBC News national security reporter Gordon Lubold. Gordon, thank you so much for joining us. President Trump said today he's considering limited military action. So talk to me about what that could look like. And given that there is this big military buildup, how can you have limited military action?
Sure. So it's really interesting. There is this massive buildup of military hardware in the region. A region that's had a lot of military buildups over the years in the past. This is bigger than what it was in June when they did what they called Midnight Hammer, bigger than what they did in the Caribbean when they went into Venezuela. What's most striking about these are that there's the capability of F-22 Raptor jet fighters, F-35s. So what's interesting is this gives a range of options, as I think everybody's been reporting, that the president could go small, medium, large, kind of a little bit Goldilocks, not to make light of it. But so what I think he's hinting at there is the possibility of, limited strikes against certain sites to kind of nudge along the nuclear deal that he actually would like that.
So what kind of targets could the United States actually strike?
Right. So as NBC reported some months ago, the Israelis really would like to go after some of the ballistic missile sites in Iran. So that's a possibility. The U.S. could also go back and look at some of the sites they hit in June that were so-called decimated and go off and kind of check those. Could go after some security sites, some labs, some other things. But there's a whole range of opportunities for them to strike just to kind of send a message.
And the president has talked about 10 to 15 days being a timeline. He loves to talk about a 2-week time frame. How realistic do you think it is that there will be a decision made in the next 10 to 15 days?
This is, I would say it's very hard to discern from this. Let's remember that in June, he said, I'm going to think about it for a couple more weeks. And then within a few days, he did the strikes of Midnight Hammer. So, that's why we're all kind of on tenterhooks to kind of see what he may or may not do. But I think that he is trying to get a deal. I think he'd prefer not to go do almost even any strikes. And if some of these kind of verbal, this rhetoric that he puts out there can bring it to a close without strikes, that's what he'll do. But I think that we're in the zone of him doing whatever he may or may not do.
What are some of the U.S. allies in the region thinking of all of this?
Yeah. So initially, as you may recall, about a month or so ago, the president was going to maybe conduct some strikes then. The Israelis, others in the region were not prepared for what could come in retaliation from Iran. And so since then, some of those air defenses and others and more capability have been kind of put into place. Remember real quick that the Ford is in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Lincoln's in the North Arabian. One is they're kind of will share the responsibilities if there is anything, but there is a need for defensive capability as well as offensive capability. So a lot of that stuff is now kind of coming in. And, I think that some of the Gulf allies who are very concerned may be kind of resigned to him doing whatever he may do. There's been generally concern about what happens the day after, but that's a whole new conversation.
A lot to look out for. Gordon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, man.
Turning now to Arizona, where it's now day 20 of the search for Nancy Guthrie, mother of our beloved colleague and Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie. Some 400 FBI agents and sheriff's deputies continue to work that case as the investigation nears the 3-week mark. Law enforcement officials say they have received roughly 50,000 tips between the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's Department also saying they've been in touch with officials on the other side of the U.S.-Mexico border, saying that such outreach is standard in a missing persons case like this one. 2 officials briefed on the case telling NBC News there is no evidence Guthrie was taken over the border. If you or anyone you know has information that can help this investigation, we encourage you to call the FBI tip line at the number on your screen, 1-800-CALL-FBI. After the break, the files and the fallout. House investigators released video from their deposition of one of Jeffrey Epstein's closest associates. As across the pond, Britain reels from the arrest of former Prince Andrew. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The Department of Justice's release of the Epstein files continues to have ripple effects around the world, with the consequences for prominent officials overseas seemingly much more severe at this moment, while there are growing calls here at home for similar accountability. Today, British authorities searched former Prince Andrew's royal residence in Windsor. That, of course, comes after he was arrested and held in detention for nearly 11 hours on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Former Prince Andrew is the most high-profile figure to face potential legal ramifications for his association with Epstein. That list also includes the former Prime Minister of Norway, who has been criminally charged with corruption over his ties to Epstein, the former French culture minister, who's under investigation for his alleged financial ties to Epstein, and the former British ambassador to the U.S., who's under investigation for misconduct in public office. Now, we should note the appearance of their names in the Epstein file does not necessarily mean they committed a crime, and they have denied all wrongdoing. Joining me now on set is NBC News senior justice reporter Ryan Riley, who has been following all of this. I want to start with this contrast between the fallout we've seen domestically and abroad. What is your view on that? What is your take on that? And also, are there increased calls for accountability here in the U.S.?
There are those increased calls, but I think there's just completely different legal systems when you're talking about, overseas versus here. And one of the main things is the statute of limitations. And that's sort of what you start from the outset. You really can't charge crimes federally outside of specific offenses, including like really horrific offenses, like, abuse of a minor or something. You can only charge within the past 5 years federally, right? So that limit right now would be 2021, and that's like 2 years after Epstein died. So that's the limit that you have to sort of look at. And typically you don't see this massive release of raw investigative materials, and that's what is causing a lot of these investigations elsewhere. I mean, the Prince Andrew, or former Prince Andrew case rather, is really remarkable because you're talking about a period of 16 years back. I mean, that's like iPhone 3G territory. It's forever ago, but that's allowed under British law, and they can get him on this charge that apparently has to do with sharing some sort of document with Epstein that he wasn't allowed to share. And the only reason we really know about that is because of the release of the Epstein files. But if something similar had happened here, if it turned out that some government official here had shared some document with Epstein back in the early Obama era, that's not really going to be a charge. Yeah. So it's just a much different legal situation.
The House Oversight Committee also released their deposition with Les Wexner. What were your top takeaways from that deposition?
I mean, the moment that went the most viral was his lawyer whispering in his ear about not talking anymore.
Using an expletive,
yes, exactly, yes, very colorfully stating that. And, typically lawyers say that in a little bit of a different way in case it's picked up by the mic. But, I mean, it is, I think, especially we are in now this moment where a lot of this accountability and, you see the clips that are playing virally. This is sort of the way that a lot of this accountability, I think, in America is going to come about in terms of just public exposure of that and like consequences, whether they be socially, whether they be financially, whether they be civilly for anyone who's caught up or is, involved in wrongdoing that is exposed by those files, just because there's not a ton criminally that you can do absent outside of very specific charges.
And Wexner was such a significant player in Ohio politics. What are leaders there saying and reacting to all of this?
Yeah, our colleague Henry Gomez has a great story out on this, basically talking about the really powerful role that he played in the state, financing a lot of lawmakers, just making these big donations. And so it is having a lot of this fallout and consequence. And I think that's what we can expect mostly. People should expect that to be the primary consequence for a lot of people in the United States. And I think that's kind of what lawmakers wanted. They wanted this all out in the open. Of course, there are a lot of calls for these criminal charges, but you just got to remember what the American system looks like. There are restrictions, in America for a reason that's different from a lot of foreign countries. There's a reason that we split ourselves off from the British 250 years ago. So maybe it's not a great idea to be able to reach back 16 years. I think a lot of lawyers in America would say the idea of being able to reach back 16 years and look at conduct that far back, there has to be some restriction on that. And that's just how it works in the UK.
Ryan, thank you so much for your insight. I know you will continue to stay on top of this important story. After the break, we're diving into the political fallout for the White House and the Republican Party as the president lashes out against the Supreme Court for delivering a major blow to his economic agenda. The panel is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
Just 1 year ago, under crooked Joe Biden, and he was crooked as hell, our country was dead. Now we have the hottest country. In 1 year, we have the hottest country anywhere in the world. You notice, what word have you not heard over the last 2 weeks? Affordability. Because I've won. I've won affordability.
Welcome back. That was President Trump yesterday in Georgia touting his economic record ahead of the Supreme Court's ruling against his tariffs today. It comes as the president tries to convince voters ahead of the midterms that his promise of an American golden age has been a promise kept. Going so far as to tell our colleague Tom Yamas this is his economy.
You said you inherited a mess from President Biden when it comes to the economy. But at what point is it on you? At what point are we in the Trump economy?
Oh, I'd say we're there now. I'm very proud of it.
But the numbers paint a significantly more complicated picture because the economy under President Trump looks eerily similar, or in some cases worse, than the mess he claims to have inherited. For example, GDP grew at a faster pace in Biden's final year in office than it did in President Trump's first full year. Job growth under President Trump has taken a significant hit, with just 181,000 jobs created in 2025, compared to nearly 1.5 million in 2024. The U.S. trade deficit, which President Trump has tried to reduce through tariffs, hasn't really budged at all compared to Biden's final year. Overall, inflation has cooled, but only slightly compared to Biden's last year in office. And the stock market has remained in the green, but it grew at a faster clip before Trump took office. Now, to be clear, voters were frustrated with the direction of the economy under President Biden as well, but polls show they're also soured on President Trump's handling of the issue. Joining me now is our excellent panel: Jeff Mason, Washington correspondent for Bloomberg; Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden; and former Republican governor of North Carolina, Pat McCrory. Thank you guys so much for joining us on an incredibly busy news day, even though it's a Friday. Happy Friday to you all. Jeff, I do want to start with you and get some White House perspective here, because how big of a blow is this decision, not just on the policy, but also on the economic messaging?
Massive. I mean, it's a massive blow to the president, politically, economically, and just in terms of international foreign policy as well. I mean, President Trump has said for years that his favorite word is tariffs. And it's his favorite word because he likes to use them as a cudgel. He does it for economic reasons. He does it for foreign policy reasons. And now the Supreme Court has essentially taken that tool out of his toolbox, at least temporarily, until the White House comes up with its backup plans on other ways to use tariffs. And they exist, and he referenced that today, but they will take longer and they won't be quite as easy. So it's a massive blow to him. That said, he came out today in that briefing room. He was clearly upset, but talked about Plan B. He's got one, and announced these 10% across the board tariffs. And he, in some ways, and I'd be curious to get Megan's take on this, the Supreme Court may have done him a favor politically by taking tariffs away. It may take away an argument that Democrats had about tariffs boosting inflation.
Yeah, Megan, it is such a great point because I know from talking to Republicans on the Hill, there's a huge sigh of relief. So in some ways, is this a victory for Republicans, especially in vulnerable races?
So I don't necessarily think it's a victory, but I would caution Democrats not to get too excited here because prices are not going to come down. This is not going to have, anybody's consumer goods are still going to cost the same amount of money as they cost today, and they're going to cost us probably more in a couple of weeks. This is all just sort of jockeying. It is a win in the sense that someone is holding him accountable and that the rule of law still exists and people still believe in the Constitution. So that is a win. But I would really caution Democrats not to get too ahead on the affordability issue because a tariff is a tax, and those taxes are still going to be in effect because consumers are still going to pay them because companies still have to pay them. They're already baked in.
And do you think Democrats are still going to go after Republicans who did walk the plank and voted essentially in support of these tariffs on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of these Republicans are extremely vulnerable for the affordability issue in general because they're not coming up with solutions. All they did for the last year and a couple of months was back President Trump's plans for more tariffs, which again is a tax to the American people. And when they talk about giving refunds, that is admitting that the American people and companies paid those taxes. What Trump said was that different countries were going to pay. That's a lie. And was on display today.
Governor, I need to bring you into this conversation. I want to get your take. The president doubled down on these tariffs. Is that surprising, or do you think he really had no choice, given he has made this a centerpiece of his economic agenda?
Oh, he had no choice. It was a tool that he was really using more for foreign policy than domestic policy, which was interesting. And I look at North Carolina right now as I go back home later on this weekend. There are going to be winners and losers in North Carolina. The domestic companies that make steel, especially in North Carolina, their stock's going down today. The retail companies are going up, the ones who depend upon more imports. So there are winners and losers in tariffs. What's ironic politically, though, how things have changed in 5 years. It used to be the Republicans who were against tariffs. In fact, the Freedom Caucus was elected by the Club for Growth. It gave millions of dollars to the Total Freedom Caucus to be against all tariffs. I know because I interviewed with them when I ran for the U.S. Senate. And then the Democrats used to actually be for tariffs to protect labor jobs. And now, as with many other issues here in Washington, looking from the outside, the Republicans and Democrats have completely flipped on the issue of tariffs, and they had to go with Trump. Trump was actually more democratic on the issue of tariffs. When he flipped, the Republican Congress had to go his way, regardless of the Club for Growth money that helped get the Freedom Caucus elected.
And we've seen that on so many issues time and time again in Washington.
You see that with state rights on voting right now.
On the economic piece of this, Trump has complained that his party isn't doing enough to sell his agenda. But could it be that Republicans just aren't really in love with what the product is that they're trying to sell?
Well, I think the problem you have right now, you have two branches of government here that are running the government. You have the executive branch and the judicial branch, and Congress has been sitting on the sideline now for over a decade. And we're being run by executive orders, and executive orders being challenged, and tariffs is just the latest. And I predict Trump will do exactly what Biden did when he lost several Supreme Court cases, and that is he'll find another executive order to challenge and a loophole in executive authority versus congressional authority and wait out the situation. So that's what Trump's going to do right now is repivot. I think the Treasury Secretary has already said that in the last hour.
Well, to that point, Jeff, how do you think the White House is going to try to message this in terms of their affordability agenda? Is it possible to still keep preaching about affordability? Do you think they're going to try to make tariffs still a part of that equation?
I do, largely because the president said he would today. I mean, he said that, again, although he's clearly really irritated, and that's a mild
understatement,
word,
right?
with the Supreme Court, he said that the Supreme Court actually created certainty by removing the question mark over those tariffs and basically telling him use another way to impose them. He's going to impose them, but he's going to have to go through a process that takes longer in order to make sure that it's legal, and that will at least take away temporarily his ability to just say, hey, if you don't give me Greenland, for example, or some other prize that he wants, I'm gonna levy tariffs. That will be a lot harder for him to do.
And in the meantime, the business community is going, what's going to happen tomorrow? As to say, certain stocks went up today, other stocks went down.
Yeah.
How are they going to plan for next week or next month as the administration repivots, and then the court will repivot after that while Congress sits on the sideline.
All while the American people are still paying more for their goods, and the cost of living still goes up. So affordability is still a main issue, and it's still only impacting the everyday American people.
But the positive news, if you want to, is the deficit is being impacted by this in a positive way, because it really is a tax, which the Democrats used to be in favor of to deal with the deficit.
Tell someone who can't buy groceries about the deficit. I don't think they care.
I agree. It's not a good selling point. Coming midterms, it's going to be very, very interesting.
Absolutely. The one thing I did also want to hit on is the way he lashed out at the Supreme Court justices, both on his Truth Social, both in the briefing today. Governor, I want to get your take on that. I mean, what does this say about just his view on loyalty, especially as he was praising some of the justices who ruled in his favor, other ones who he appointed he didn't?
Well, I'm here this weekend for a conference called Principles First, where we have to start respecting the branches of government and the offices in which we hold. And that's been going down, you know, when President Obama attacked the Supreme Court during a State of the Union address, that was kind of a way, you just don't do that.
Right.
And then it's gone to a whole nother extreme with this statement being made today against the Supreme Court. And that's, to me, where we're just seeing this lack of respect for our institutional politics, which is our Constitution. I'm still positive that the Constitution and this piece of paper is stronger than any politician or any outlet that's challenging the strength of our country right now.
And also, this comes ahead of the State of the Union address. Megan, just really quickly, what are your thoughts on Democrats' choice of Abigail Spanberger to be their counter address?
I think it's great. She won in an off year, which is incredible. She won on she's a new leader in the Democratic Party. Her whole message is affordability and lowering costs for her constituents. And I think it's a really great choice.
Thank you guys so much for joining me. Jeff, Governor, and Megan, it was great having your insights for the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you all. We're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. And there's more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.